So look, I mean, I think what is important to understand is that this infrastructure, in these DLT-based environments and this philosophy of a smart financial contract living in these DLT-based environments, I am convinced that whoever gets this right for the first time in 220 years can build a meaningful capital market without Anglo-Saxons.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
All right, I am excited today to have Ralf Kubli, who is a board member of the Casper Association. And the Casper Association is the organization behind a new blockchain called Casper, appropriately enough. And Ralf and I have been spending a little bit of time talking about, we have some very similar historical backgrounds. So Ralf, first of all, before we get started into kind of what Casper is and why it exists, if you wouldn't mind kind of telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into crypto, but also your background in the technology arena prior to that, that would be great. And welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Exciting to be here. So in the early 90s and mid 90s, I was in grad school and I had a little bit of time on my hands because I was a history major, and it's not as intense as other, I would say, schools. And so a couple of friends started coding HTML, at university. And I remember, so actually, I got my first email in 1993. You had to fill out a piece of paper, and request. You could still actually pick your name. You could pick your own name at the time, which was a crazy thought. And and we were starting out browsing text-based browsers, and then as we discussed before, I remember downloading Mosaic, and then of course coding HTML. For about 2.5 years, I was creating and maintaining websites with some friends of mine. And, it was then in 1995 when a relative of mine said, hey, you should stop going to school now and go to the US. I grew up in Switzerland, right? Go to the US and learn everything about the web because it's the future.
Nice. When you first, real quickly, when you first encountered the first web browser you used, you said it was Mosaic. Was that a moment for you of aha, or was it, oh, this is just improves on what I was already doing? Because you were so early. Like, I mean, you were pre that user interface that we all kind of got used to it from like 95, 96 on. You were doing things, I guess, like Gopher and those kinds of interfaces. Was it for you just a transition? Oh, this is an improvement, an upgrade, or was it like, oh, wait, this really changes things?
I don't think I really understood the impact, it would have, right? So it was just another version of accessing. It was just another version of accessing the same resources. But of course, when we started building websites and we pushed the limits, of what was possible then, with a fairly small group of people that was kind of like cutting edge, that was really interesting. And you could feel that it was qualitatively different than, of course, what we had done before. I should have listened to my relative more closely because he was selling mainframe computers, right? He was was high up in a mainframe manufacturer, and he basically said, listen, this is the future, and yeah, you should really pursue it.
And you didn't?
I didn't. Yeah, I stopped.
Wow.
I stopped coding HTML in '97 for reasons I still do not understand. But it's the reason why I'm in crypto today, right? Because in 2015, 16, when I came across, the Ethereum and some of these environments, I realized that I am given a second chance in life to be part of a equally, momentous and relevant technological innovation, right? Which is why I'm in this business today. I mean, which is why I'm in this industry, because it is the natural development from what we've experienced at that time, but with a much more powerful ethic and of course technology behind it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What kind of a career were you in between stopping your HTML coding and moving into crypto?
Yeah, I was in large firms, in large companies. Funny enough, the very first job I had for a few years in the beginning was to build e-commerce platforms, right? So I mean, I stopped in '97. I didn't follow the advice, of my relative, and then I ended up. The very first job I had, I was responsible for. I was representing a marketing department in the e-commerce, efforts of a company. We were very early there as well. One of the
Sure.
guys, the people that I worked for, he was really pushing it, but I remember those meetings, as probably some of your listeners as well. There was like Qualcomm would come in, and you had all these large companies that would offer $1 million, platforms or multi-million-dollar projects. And of course, the infrastructure was nowhere close of being ready to, to have a spare parts business. I mean, I was an industrial company.
Sure.
Spare parts business or other business on the web, it was impossible, right? But so that's what I did and then I did the general management career, and I worked in large companies, and then in 2015, I came across, at some point I left large firms, and then I worked for an AI startup, and then in 2015, 16, I really came across, I think that the seminal or the key recognition was I read an article which I recommend, and maybe we can post it in your thing. I read an article by three economists, which actually were quite well known. They're still known today in the space. One of them was Primavera de Filippi, which is somewhat known, right, in the space. Yep. She was at the Berkman Klein Center in Harvard, and anyway, so these three economists were basically laying out that blockchain is not just a technology, but it's basically a channel for economic activity, right? And the platform for economic activity, and it competes with institutions of capitalism. And what are institutions of capitalism? Markets, firms, and the government, right? And now you have a fourth element here in the world, and that got me totally excited.
Nice.
And I made the determination to really join the space however I could.
That's fantastic. It's funny when you were referencing wishing you had taken your relative's advice. I stayed in web, but I went the startup route, and look, I arguably made a good amount of money for my age at the time, which was great. Got acquired, went public, all that good stuff. But I'm convinced to this day that if I had just stayed in building web pages, I would have made so much more money because of how much people were charging for websites at that time. I mean, you talk about a price drop. It is astounding. Like it's a dramatic difference. That's so the article itself was focused upon kind of how, I assume it sounds like it was, because I don't think I've read this, but it sounds like it was really focused upon kind of how it changes the infrastructure of finance, and how it changes and opens up more access to finance. What was that kind of the calling card for you, that for you it was this not only kind of rebellious or revolutionary kind of thing, but that it really opened the door to more people? What was kind of the appeal for you?
No, the appeal was really a combination of the idea that you would have the ability to build completely new, not completely new, but you'd have an additional component that would enable economic activity,
Right.
right? And of course, trust. This idea of Bitcoin and Ethereum, large public networks as a trust layer, right? As producing trust between individuals and parties that otherwise could not trust each other. That's an extremely powerful idea, right? Because
Right.
all economic activity, relies on trust, right?
Right.
And in some countries, that cost of trust is really high, right? So when you think about emerging economies or where you have weak institutions, the cost of trust is really high, which means that the level of economic activity gets smaller because you have to spend so much money, right? So in the US, we spend a lot of money on lawyers, right? But in China or in Africa, you spend money on security firms and family relationships and decades of business relationships that enable you at some point to transact with other parties, right? So that's all cost. And suddenly you now have this thing called a blockchain where you can produce trust out of thin air immediate, and that's amazing.
Love that. And I think that is absolutely, I think it's one of the most empowering things about this is that it eliminates the need for, I've never heard it phrased quite that way, but you're right. We spend a fortune in time and money trying to figure out the best ways to either have trust or at least have rails around it enough to allow us to say, okay, I'll trust this for now. It eliminates so much of that, which is obviously that's a very appealing thing. And that's really cool that is what caught your eye, is that's what really, having that realization. I don't think a lot of people even think about those things. So kind of having that hit you is, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So that'd be really excited. I mean, when you think about what this means for economies, and, many times people say, well, blockchain is a solution in search of a problem. I mean, I just described a really, really large problem, right?
Correct. Right.
So I don't think the technology is in search of a problem. We are all in search of some killer applications, and we need to start. Well, you remember we started out in the Web 2 space with extremely narrow applications. So we as an industry need to find this narrow application and, build tech businesses as they have been built, for the last 60 years.
Sure.
You start with a small application and you grow from there. And it's a bit challenging because we are dependent on very complex application environments. But yeah, so this cost of trust reduction really caught my eye. And I think it's exciting. Then what this means today is, you can cryptographically secure ownership, right? Digital ownership. You couldn't do that, before the advent of this technology.
Right.
Right. I mean, NFTs are an expression thereof, but I'm not just thinking of JPEGs. Could also be a piece of code. Right. Can be a formula for a molecule, right? The chemical. Could be, could be biotech engineering, where you can, as an inventor and as a creator, can really prove ownership and can enable afterwards, monetization of that technology and of your invention in a way that was previously just impossible.
It's true. It's funny you said that about that we are a technology in search of a problem is what people say. One of the things, here in the US, as we're having these discussions about the regulatory structure here and the problems we're having in the United States in this industry, I say this to repeatedly, and I've had a lot of discussions with people who are raising money for lobbying and campaigning here in the United States to try to change our positioning. But for over a couple of years now, one of my primary points has been that we are completely missing the boat in how we frame what we bring to the table. And just in general terms, if you applied crypto and blockchain to the existing financial system, you not only eliminate the need to trust in a lot of ways, you eliminate the potential for a lot of fraud that has occurred, and things like the mortgage crisis and other things that happen in around the world. But you also eliminate huge amounts of cost, right? All of those things you were talking about earlier about the infrastructure we build for trust, all of the infrastructure we build in this United States or financial systems worldwide for settling transactions and making sure things are being done correctly, you eliminate all of those things. Now, it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem. But one of the arguments I often make is that we keep sitting back in the United States begging not to be regulated and trying to figure out where to put ourselves, when in fact we can be a proactive solution to the problems that exist in the financial system. And so for me, it's very frustrating. But you know, that's how things roll here.
Look, I think, and I know you have a fair amount of traders in your, among your audience and institutional investors. I think it's important to understand that we need to separate the technology from the asset class, right? So, and I think the regulators misunderstand that to a certain extent. In the US, certainly, it doesn't appear it appears completely irrational at times, right? So, but in Europe, let's just face it, right? It's the same problem in Europe, and forget about Asia. But look, I mean, you have to separate the asset class, and maybe I'll speak quickly about the asset class, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I see the finance infrastructure develop. But so when you think about the asset class, people sometimes ask, in conversations, why is this worth anything, right? Because it's created out of thin air. Well, these technologies, these cryptocurrencies are worth something because we have an expectation that in the future, certain economic activities will occur on these networks, right? This is what I just laid out, right? The solution to trust is huge, right? The problem we're solving is very large. So that means at some point, someone will figure out how to use this infrastructure, hopefully, with a similar event like an iPhone moment, right? We're waiting for the iPhone moment, or the App Store moment, sorry, not the App Store, but the App Store moment, an iPhone moment.
Sure.
So at some point, someone will figure out to use this infrastructure and really create massive amounts of economic value for certain and with certain applications. That's why this asset class has value, right? That's why we ascribe value to the asset class. And some people think that, Bitcoin is going to be the reserve currency and the trust anchor for everything. That's great. You can believe that or not. It doesn't matter, right? Same for Ethereum, which has a little bit different functionality. And then there's all these altcoins that, that some people are building, I mean, including our project, but, that's what we're building for, right? We're building infrastructure for future economic activity to happen. And then what you've mentioned, the other part is, how will this really impact the infrastructure of the financial, of the financial system overall? And I would argue, as you argue as well, it's going to be quite profound and significant, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Because, a token is the ideal collateral, in a blockchain environment or DLT environment, the trade is the settlement. I mean, just when you think about it in those terms, I mean, which is why I'm saying, when I speak to audiences that are very skeptical, I say, look, blockchain is the single most important technology in finance since the introduction of computers in banks.
Nice.
And what it should be not mistaken is, finance is not payments. The problem that I think we have in the conversation is that the broader public, even fintech experts, mistake, the nice shiny applications that we have been delivered by centralized organizations over the last 15 years, mostly focus around payments, right? The innovation is extremely limited, and efficiency is very limited in payments. And I would even venture to say, even some people may disagree with that here, payments is largely solved. The fact that we pay a lot of money for cross-border money transfers has probably more to do with the fact that these infrastructures are owned and controlled by private equity firms than with the technological capabilities.
Right. Absolutely.
But payments is not finance, right? Finance is the exchange of cash over time, right? I give you money today and you give me money back, whatever we agree. That's finance. And that is slightly more complex to solve, in a decentralized environment than a payment, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So look, I think what is important to understand is that this infrastructure, in these DLT-based environments, and this philosophy of a smart financial contract living in these DLT-based environments, I am convinced that whoever gets this right for the first time in 220 years can build a meaningful capital market without Anglo-Saxons. And when I'm in Europe, I say to the Europeans, when I'm in the US, of course, but it's true, it's not going to rival. It's not going to compete. No, it's not going to replace or, dramatically impact. No, actually, that's wrong. It will dramatically impact the existing, locations. It will not replace them. That's not possible. It's not possible. But
that's realizing that's tapping untapped potential, right? That's
French,
empowering.
I'm telling you, the French and the Germans understand it very well, right? They do not, the French and the Germans, they do not want to continue paying $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 per hour to lawyers that just securitize something that should be done automatically. They're done. They're done doing that, right?
So, and half the time they're repurposing the thing they gave to the last client.
Yes.
That's. I was going through that today with my partner. I was like, we already did this documentation. I paid for it previously. Well, let's get it how we want it, and then they can stamp of approval it because they've already written it. But
they understand that very well, right? There's people that understand that very well, and we're working with these investment banks that have done a lot. And in a DVP, just so, I think that's for the next one when we talk about finance, but for these DVP environments, right, you need to understand, if you don't understand what you're delivering, right, the payment is great, right, tokenization, CBDCs, JP Morgan coin, commercial bank money, whatever, that really solves the counterparty risk in a payment, in a versus payment leg, right, in the payment leg. But if your security that you're delivering, if that contains cash flows, and you do not have that in a machine readable or machine executable form that is standardized, then you're gaining nothing. Then you just solved one problem, which is a big problem, I agree.
Sure.
And of course, you already, in repo environments where you only, post cash-like instruments, that already is a big, it's already a big, a big efficiency gain. But as soon as you move away from the cash-like instruments and you move to cash, to any kind of ABS, any kind of MBS, CMBS, RMBS instruments, we are back to 2008. If you don't have a more efficient way of understanding the cash flows that occur and occurred and will occur in this instrument, nobody will switch to this new settlement environment because the efficiency on the price discovery and the security on the D side, on the delivery side, is not given, right?
That's really interesting.
That's what we're building, and we have some traction, and hopefully in like 3-4 months, I can already say we have people that are potentially, life cycle managing tens of billions of dollars of assets. If we
so you dove headfirst into crypto. What was your path to getting to where you are now in crypto or blockchain?
That's good. So in 2015, I think really 16, I started to look at some of these, the literature. I was privileged to spend some time. I lived in New York at the time, and I connected with a group. Now I can't remember what the group was called, and we had like meetups. They had meetups in Brooklyn. It was amazing. I mean, I think I was probably one of the first few hundred that opened a Kasha account, if people still remember that.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember. I have to write this down, otherwise, for the OGs. There was like Block Square. Was it Block Square? With the ID that was tied to your Twitter account. It'll come to me in a second.
I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, it'll come back. So it was great. It was great. It was really spirited debates between Bitcoin maximalists and Ethereum maximalists, at these events. So that was really good. So that's that was my exposure. And then I was very lucky to meet some people in Switzerland when I was on vacation, actually, when I visited, that were starting a VC, and they asked me to join, and I joined without a big concept. So we did early stage venture capital investments for seed startups in 2017, 18, 19. So that's how I got into crypto. And then at some point I left the VC and I joined some of the boards and also did some work as an operator in some of these companies that came through.
That's incredible. What a nice turn of events there. That's excellent.
Yeah, it was great. And I mean, it was not foreseeable, but Switzerland was very busy at the time, as probably many people know, right? Everybody, it was the preferred setup. Everybody came. I mean, we had meetings. I mean, it was crazy, right? There was 17, 18. I mean, you get to the office, and then there was people just stand on your door and they said, "We want to see the crypto valley. We want to see the crypto valley, and where is it?" And and we called our offices the crypto. I can't remember, the Crypto Valley Labs. Yeah, CV Labs, the Crypto Valley Labs, and people just came. Koreans, Japanese.
That's awesome.
I mean, it was amazing.
It's a great way to get deal flow.
It was but you couldn't. I mean, but the deal flow was, I'm going to revolutionize the world and eliminate all banks. And that's quite difficult, right?
The same pitch over and over. Yeah, I get it.
Yes.
Okay, so while we're in this category, on your LinkedIn profile, it says part of your mission, I guess, is to help Switzerland maintain. Well, you tell me what the
it's regulatory arbitrage situation, right? So for a while, look, I think it was really interesting, and the path to innovation, also from a legislative point of view, was really interesting in Switzerland. Steeped in Swiss traditions, so there were a few people that said, "Hey, this is really awesome." And we missed the boat in 2000, in 2001. Right. Mind you, the web was developed in Switzerland, right? At CERN, right? So Web 2.0 was saw the light of the day of the world in Geneva at CERN, and there are zero unicorns in the web space in Switzerland. So there were some people that said, we can't have this happen again. So they got together and pushed, PR, and invited, ministers, and did all kinds of outreach, and it kind of developed a really interesting dynamic. And what is of interest for the audience maybe to understand is that Switzerland, in financial services, quite frankly, is not very innovative, right? Because these bankers, they make a lot of money. They're not really bankers. They're private bankers. They're asset managers. This is not banking as we would understand it. Some Swiss people that sit here may be upset or not, but I would say, this is not the same kind of banker you meet in New York or in London or even in Paris and Frankfurt, and Hong Kong. It's a different. But there were some people that really wanted to take this technology and continue to build what they had started. So in Switzerland, securities had been immaterialized for a long time, actually, already. So, and there were no stocks. Most securities that are issued in Switzerland are not what is called uncertificated securities. So then the step from a entry in a banking system or on an Excel sheet, right? I mean, people keep track of shares, you know, in Excel, right? And it's legal to do that in a list. The step from that to a DLT-based environment is not that far, right? So that's a fairly small step. But of course, many things had to be changed in order, for example, for an ownership change in a DLT environment to be law and to be actually lawful, right? And or transfer of ownership, excuse me. So transfer of ownership in a DLT-based environment. And there were some people that really wanted to make it happen, and they got together and they worked all kinds of lobby things. And, you know, the finance minister at the time was very supportive. He retired just recently. So he really made that happen. So now Switzerland has a really forward-looking framework. There are other hurdles in Switzerland for capital markets issuance. It's fairly easy to issue. It's inconceivable for like your US-based audience to imagine that in Switzerland, for example, any company can issue a bond.
Wow.
Any company can just issue debt. Right?
Wow.
So you know, as long as you're a company, you can issue debt. I mean, it's
amazing.
The question is, who are you selling it to? You know, and
Sure.
you know, how many people are you offering it to, etc. So that of course is then somewhat regulated activity depending on what you're doing, but you can still issue it. So
It's
that's
much
kind of
easier
crazy.
to issue it. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, many people understood the power of this technology, right? And quite frankly, so do now the Germans and the French and the English to some extent, the UK, and the US is really falling behind if it continues to make it difficult to engage in this environment, right? I mean, in my opinion, a bond that lives in a DLT environment is still a bond.
Exactly.
It's not,
exactly.
you know, it's still a bond. So why do you have to regulate it differently? You don't. It's the same thing.
No.
It's a bond, right? So
well, look, I think there are a couple of motivations in the United States. I think that one of them is protecting the economic interests of the people who are the private providers of the infrastructure that makes regulation happen.
yes.
I think there is a bit of a control need and nanny attitude on another side of the coin politically in this country that thinks they need to protect people from themselves. And I think that's part of the problem as well. And then I think, look, I think there's a real lack of curiosity. And another big problem in the United States is at least earlier, a majority of the folks involved here had a very strong libertarian bent, and to the point that they did not want to involve themselves in the government in any way. And they thought that the blockchain would take care of everything. And so obviously in hindsight, and well, even at the time, I thought it was foolish, but in hindsight, not the best strategy for establishing a business. I mean, an industry. What's really fascinating to me is I think we all think back, just kind of think, oh, well, this, you know, Switzerland just got it. And they went with their natural thing, right? But no, there was an entire force of humans who said, we want to make this happen. And they made it happen. And they made it happen before it was more difficult, right? Or threatening than it is now. And so I think that's really important people to understand is that this was not something that just happened because the Swiss are just nice people. It happened because people wanted to make it happen and they worked to make it happen in the system. That's amazing.
But I think when you look at but of course the degens have a point, right? I mean, you know, fiat is just fiat, right? And you know, and clearly over the last decade or so, you know, we were all expropriated by central banks in one way or the other. Right. So, you know, the alternative, you know, of a Bitcoin is kind of like a sensible alternative, you know, if you of course believe that, you know, that the monopoly or the state power would relent at some point and make it, you know, and make it legal tender or something like this, right? So it's not inconceivable. I mean, you know, the thought process is kind of like, okay. But when you look at the situation today, and maybe we bring it to today, right? I mean, you have large asset managers like Franklin Templeton, like Fidelity, like, you know, the KKRs, experiment with this technology. And why do they do that? Because it's more efficient, because it's a token is the perfect collateral. And lastly, I mean, when you listen to I always forget her first name, the CEO of Franklin Templeton, whose name is Johnson, just like the CEO of Fidelity, whose name is Abigail Johnson, that I remember. But they both make the point in some ways, but certainly Franklin Templeton publicly, they say we need tokenization to access private markets for our clients. Right? We will not have enough product diversity and products because so much of the capital markets is going private. So that's why they're pushing this. And I think it's inevitable, to take advantage of tokenization. I think large parts of the markets do it the wrong way, but tokenization of shares is relatively easy. Yep. But you mentioned the financial crisis afterwards. I would say that any financial instrument that is tokenized, certainly when cash flows are attached, which is slightly different from a share, right? That is tokenized, a fund share or so. But any financial instrument that has cash flows needs to have the logic of the cash flows in the token. And currently, nobody is doing that really the right way. They are just producing, they're putting term sheets in the form of a PDF inside the token and call it a tokenized security, which it is, but it's a dumb tokenized security. It's very stupid. These are very stupid tokens. And I don't think that they're, the traders among you, they know that, you can trade on technicals and trends, but in the end, you want to understand what is inside this instrument. You need to have a mechanism of price discovery to understand whether it's overvalued or undervalued. And if you do not have that in a machine readable and machine executable form inside the token that is issued and that is representing the financial instrument and the underlying cash flows, no one will use this infrastructure. That is my hypothesis.
I think there's a strong argument there. I think there's still advantages, even with dumb tokens, to having the transparency of the network. But I love the idea of building in the intelligence into the token, which is completely possible with what we have available to us, to actually understand what it represents with the company or project that it represents ownership in or cash flow from.
The cash flows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, the world runs on I mean, it's always great to do equity investments, but let's face it, the world runs on credit.
Sure, absolutely.
Right. The world runs on credit, and we need to solve the credit problem if we want to have growth. If we want to grow economies, you need to give credit, right? That's what the central banks tried to do, and they didn't do it very well. Because the credit gap for small and medium-sized companies persists, right? Since for a long time. So clearly that problem is not being solved. And I think with this logic and with the capabilities that you get by including the logic of these cash flows on a granular level into these instruments, in this new settlement environment and trading capability and collateralization capabilities that you have with DLTs, that is really a step change.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Are you aware of any implementations of those kinds of ideas?
Yeah, we do it. So I mean, that's why I say it, right? But
I was wondering if I was going to give you an opening to that transition.
But it's a neutral. We have a neutral position here. Where everything we build, and actually that brings us to DeFi and TradFi, right? So which before I go there, so DeFi and TradFi are not that dissimilar. It's still finance.
Sure.
Right. It's still finance. And I would argue the difference between DeFi and TradFi is that in DeFi, the counterparty is very different and the counterparties are very different. It's a protocol. It may be decentralized or not, but it's still a protocol. I mean, it's most likely a protocol. But it's finance. And what we do at Casper, and what we encourage other chains to do, by the way, and Cardano is building on the same open source algorithmic financial standard called ACTUS, algorithmic contract type unified standard. So we are building everything that we're building on this open source algorithmic standard. which allows, everybody to use the same data model and the same algorithms to deterministically define the cash flow obligations and the obligations of the parties on the exchange, whatever is being exchanged, right? You could theoretically also define a commodity, right, inside such a contract. So, yeah, and we believe that is the way forward, and that also kind of resolves this difference between TradFi and DeFi, because DeFi is still finance. It's just in a different environment and with different counterparties.
Sure. No, it makes total sense. Is that kind of the origin of Casper, or how did Casper come about? Why did Casper come about?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So no, Casper was founded a bit more than 4 years ago by two co-founders, Mehta Parlikar and Mrinal Manohar, who both had careers in corporations. I mean, Mehta was in technology firms, and Mrinal was an early open source contributor to a number of projects, and then was in investment banking, in New York. And they were convinced that at the time, keep in mind, right? So this is really early in the space. At the time, many projects made the mistake that they would go down a proprietary route and a very monolithic route in the architecture, and they really wanted to avoid that. And they also believe that this correct by construction, right, which is Casper CBC, right, which is an early, like an Ethereum research project, so to speak, or a research project that came out of the Ethereum community, that had some technical merits, and they wanted to implement, this specific, this specific philosophy with a non-monolithic approach, and with an approach that is more common in software development, right? Which is iterative, which relies on existing tools to test. So at the time when they started, they picked Rust, right, as the basis to program, as opposed to developing their own platform, language, which was not a very popular choice. I mean, I would say Near was maybe another project that did that early on, and there were not that many projects, that did that.
Right.
So they were early, and then of course this philosophy of an iterative approach, of existing, development environments, IDEs, and testing environments that you could use. You don't have to wait, It's not a weakness that you use existing infrastructure, and good software development practices is actually a strength, right? So that was the philosophy. And today, the Casper ecosystem consists of many contributors, but two core entities. One is the Casper Association, on which board I am with two other board members. And the Casper Association will have members, and those members are validators. So it's going to be an association. It's not a foundation. It's an association, which means that members will basically rule the association.
Right.
That doesn't mean that there's, this is not with respect to the chain. It's just with respect to the association, which is kind of the steward of the open source development at this point.
Got it.
And then there's Casper Labs, which is a, solution integrator and basically professional services company that also develops a large part currently of the core, but also develops enterprise applications, right, for enterprises with enterprises.
Okay. Okay. So kind of a unique approach, wanted to implement that kind of technological vision, pretty much ahead of the time in terms of picking Rust, I would say. Yeah. And obviously allowing and opening the door to a lot more development talent, right? You don't have to learn something new that's more difficult to learn than the average development tools. And I would assume that there's probably a bit less risk in using Rust in terms of the security of the protocols that get created, which is typically the case as opposed to Solidity. Well, let's start here. Where does the project stand right now in terms of the chain, and then how long has it been I'm assuming mainnet's live and all
Mainnet,
of that,
yes,
but tell
yes.
us all about that if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I think before we go into some of these details, I think it's also important for the audience to understand, while we respect, and personally, of course, I respect, and I'm a big fan, of Ethereum and other environments. If we want these smart contracting platforms to really have an impact in the world, we need the millions of developers that can code Java, and Rust and Python to get engaged in our space, right? We cannot say, well, yeah, this project has a huge developer community. That huge developer community is negligible in comparison to the rest of the developer universe, right? So we need to find ways and engage, and how can I say that? And motivate much larger groups, much larger numbers to engage with this technology if we want to have an impact in the world, right? I mean, this is just, TVL, again, the world runs on credit, and, look at the size of credit markets and look at the size of TVL. And, it's not even a conversation topic, right? Whether this is relevant or not. So we need to think in different categories, and that's what that's kind of like what unifies the people that are engaged in Casper, this motivation, right, of enlarging the community with beyond just the crypto bubble, right? So if you want to say. So where do we stand today? Yeah, mainnet has been live for a little bit over 3 years now. 2.5. So now I'm blurring here on the year, but yeah, and there are a number of enterprise applications on the chain right now.
Okay.
So we are quite proud. For the geeks among you, you could look at there's a project called IPW, IPWE.com, IPWE.com, which is tokenizing or representing patents on chain, right?
Oh,
so
nice.
IP rights, very interesting use case, we believe. There's a few other projects that cannot be disclosed, but so I would say we are quite far down the road in terms of usability of the platform. There is work being done on an abstraction layer for smart contracting language, so it should be easier to write smart contracts. The association, so Casper Association, has recently released a developer portal, which really guides people through through a few basic steps so they can engage with the technology. Our goal is, you can build a smart contract within 30 minutes, sorry. So within 30 minutes, you can get started. So, so I would say in terms of maturity, we are well on the way. When we compare ourselves with some other smart contracting platforms, I think we have some tooling and some infrastructure that is a little bit better, but we are still struggling with scalability. That we need to work on. We are currently revising the next release will address some of the database size problems. Fast thinking will be enabled, etc. So all aspects that really will contribute to the to the ease of use and to rolling it out in different environments. I would say that our roadmap, I mean, you can look at the roadmap on GitHub, it's all public, right?
Right.
The roadmap that we have for the next 6 to 9 months is very substantial and will improve the environment quite a bit, and will allow a lot of people to develop and to build on the platform more easily and performant.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this idea of making it more accessible for people to create smart contracts and speeding that up is fantastic. Are you, we talked about it, wanting to do something different than the existing monolithic systems that were being built. Is is the approach to this that the functions within the system are very modular, and so then that's why something like these enterprise applications kind of were attracted and drawn to it, because they get some of the capabilities and benefits of a blockchain, but they can also use things that they need as opposed to navigating every function of the chain. Is that kind of the thinking?
That's exactly what the thinking is. And I mean, we can give you some examples. Yeah. So one is, we have this issue now with database size. We recently changed, just one component of that database infrastructure, and we will change more. We are currently testing a new consensus algorithm and mechanism. We can just do that, right?
Sure.
We will unify in the next several releases. At some point, we will unify the account and the contract model, which means that you can have self-executing contracts, natively on chain, right? So
Sure.
we have Casper has a weighted key model on the chain, so native to the chain, which means that you can benefit from it, from the security of the chain when you are making certain business logic decisions. And you can make those mutable or immutable. It's your choice, right? So it's another
interesting.
It's another idea, right? So the past, of course, we agree should be immutable, but the future, can be mutable, right? So this is what we call smart upgradable smart contracts, right? You have the opportunity to build with this weighted key environments, build infrastructure that you can change, just like what you're used to in existing environments. And this is not just enterprises, but it's any software development environment, right? Any project,
Well, one of the things I often talk about is that in the Solidity world, iterating as a startup is incredibly difficult, right? I mean, there are just too many things that can go wrong and too much difficulty in changing what you already have. So that's actually that's really interesting to hear that you all are taking
people
that approach.
leave. I mean, what are you going to do with the key of someone who left, right? I mean, are you, when you change the contract and you have to move it, I mean, are you still sure that it's not still execute? I mean, this is one of the big problems, right? Are you sure that it's not still executing, for some people that are addressing it, etc. So this is just good practice. Iterative, agile development requires in such infrastructure, and we believe that we have a pretty strong proposition for the market.
Yeah, that's great. So I could see, Solidity developers listening to this right now saying, wow, this sounds really attractive. This gives me more capability, more float, more functionality, more flexibility. From your perspective, when you all are thinking about kind of the future for Casper and generating users and generating developers for it, what are your approaches going forward kind of strategically to gain more market share, to bring in these other developers we've been talking about? Are you taking an approach of, hey, we want a lot of DeFi type applications? Are you taking an approach of, hey, we're really targeting enterprise first and foremost? Kind of what's the thought process for how you're going to gain developers and users?
Cool. Yeah. Well, first of all, of course, we want more DeFi primitives and we want more DeFi infrastructure. So we have two hearts, right? I have two hearts, right? So we have the heart of the community, we have the heart for the community, for the people that really want to build something that is independent from, corporate BS, if you want to call it. And, they really want to contribute to great technology, right? So we want to be a home for these people too. We don't just want to be a home for people that, need a public option for Hyperledger. That's not what we want to be, right? So we want to be on both sides. And it's important that we're on both sides, because innovation comes from the forward-looking, from the pressing, from the technically committed people. But at the same time, you have to have someone that's using it as well. So this is why we also need people that are building real businesses and real business logic and use cases, be this in an enterprise or just for a project and the startup, right? So this is really important. And the other aspect is, when you think back, we take a lot of cues from the Linux and the Red Hat model, right? Linux and Red Hat, right? So how why was Linux so successful? Because everybody was waiting for Linux, because everybody knew there was a big problem. And then you had, hundreds, thousands of people contribute to this code base.
Right.
And at some point there was a tipping point, because these people that had contributed could suddenly make a lot of money in enterprise environments that also realized that this was solving some of their critical environments and problems, right?
Sure.
So this is really, I think this is the same for the space that we are in.
That's really interesting. So understanding that people who gain the skills and understand how this works, that when you reach kind of a critical demand in the enterprise space, you'll have a group of folks who have created projects who can be similar to the Red Hats and or professional services models that we see in other industries today, right? So with the idea that it can serve both. It can serve kind of the general consumer, retail, whomever that wants more options with the internet and with blockchain and with finance, but also can be something that people have gained skills and they can now serve large enterprises or
Exactly.
other entities. Yeah, that's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. From the perspective of you all, I have to believe that it's after building this for 4 years, seeing kind of this flood of Me Too blockchains in the space, and this isn't critical of Casper at all. It's just kind of like this mess of things that are being dumped onto the space that don't really have any differentiators or value proposition. I have to imagine it must be a little frustrating to kind of have this crowd of things happening while you all have labored for 4 years trying to create something superior to what's there, right? Is that something that you all have kind of struggled with, and then or have you just kind of said, no, we're just going to persevere and build through this and we're going to do it? And do you find right now, kind of at the stage where you are, where it's maturing and you're kind of ready to go to the world in terms of what you have, that it's kind of difficult to get that attention? So
look, I think that's a really interesting question. I think obviously a rising tide, lifts all the boats.
true.
Right?
Absolutely.
So we need, and this is complex technology. This has many aspects. Critical components for the next few years, which are, around zero knowledge proofs and zero knowledge virtual machines, which are essential really for scaling and for layer 2, for layer 2 solutions. And for, quite frankly, for our privacy, right? We don't want to live in a we don't want to live in a dystopian world where everything is available on a chain, in some form or fashion. That's really not what we want to do, right? So
exactly.
So there is a need for this massive amount of resources that needs to be spent. Of course, I wished that these resources wouldn't be spent on the same things that 4 years ago people tried to build on Ethereum and didn't work, right? So that is kind of frustrating when you see some of these highly capitalized projects deploy millions of dollars for certain use cases, and you're like, yeah, but we remember, well, I just pick Akasha or whatever, we remember that was already tried, and there's reasons why it didn't work, right? So maybe you should really study that, and not hire another set of 22-year-old programmers, that are developing this and give up after 6 months because they can't agree on anything. But the point is, I think that this is a bit of the challenge, right? And I wished that, of course, venture capitalists would play a better role than what they have played, a more constructive role than what they have played in the space, right? So anybody can have their own opinions about what happened, and what regulatory action would or would not be appropriate with respect to certain project sales and investment practices. Who else is going to give guidance to these projects, right? It's certainly, it cannot be, developer-led firms typically are not necessarily successful, right? So this is a problem, right? So you cannot have highly intelligent, socially dysfunctional people run organizations that have, that have a lot of money, because it's not necessarily a recipe for success, right? So
That's so true.
So this is, I guess, this is a very general answer, but I mean and
No,
maybe
look, I
that's
think
the fate of technology innovation. I don't know, but that's
well, look, it's kind of the normal path, right? We look. Obviously, I agree with you. The VCs need to take a more responsible approach, and I think, interestingly enough, they all are, because they now feel like they should have in the first place, right? But the incentives for them were, instead of a 5 to 10 year window for their investment returns, it's a 3 to 5 month return.
Exactly.
So it's really difficult to get people to step away from that to say, no, guys, let's do this the right way. Right now, there are people in the space that have always taken that approach, and thankfully they're there. But I think the market's correcting for that, and I think it's correcting for the mindset to some extent. It'll always come back. Don't get me wrong. There'll always be that component of it. But I think you're absolutely right that it would have been very helpful along the way for us to have had some guidance, some adult supervision, that from people who have already been through the pain and suffering of launching startups and tech and finance, right? I mean, it's not difficult. So I definitely agree with you. I think we're kind of hitting that stage now where I think we'll see more of that. I definitely, it makes sense. When you all are approaching developers today, what kind of, when you're talking to people that already know Rust or already know other programming languages, are you finding that in the space that people are well informed? Is it a mix of people that understand blockchain but haven't touched it, and people who are adamantly against anything that's got any connotation of crypto? Kind of, what are you running into as you go out to talk to developers about joining and building something on Casper?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, right? So we see a lot of people that believe in the power of distributed ledger technology, right?
Right.
I mean, it's so powerful, right? So, they understand the economics with the trust. I mean, some of these people have a similar, what I laid out in the beginning, right? So this reduction of trust and this cost of trust, I mean, it solves fundamental problems. And then you have a decentralized system which solves yet another set of problems, right? So central point of failure. I mean, all the things that programmers and developers have faced, in their lifetime and in their projects. We see people, specifically those that have contributed to some open source projects early in their careers. They are more open, right? But they are disappointed by the froth, to use like a slightly loaded term, of course, by the rock pools. I mean, if you're if you're an experienced programmer and you come to this space and and you see Pepe coins and Shiba Inus, and I mean, you're like, I can't do it. Why I can't? You guys are great. I'm not going to spend my time here. So this is a challenge, right? So we need to convince them to still consider the serious players. That's the wrong word, but to convince serious technology approaches, right? There's many serious players, but look for the technology approach. Try to find a home for that. Quite frankly, and unfortunately, many projects struggle in attracting talent because of this additional hurdle of a proprietary language. I think I think most of them recognize that.
Sure.
So I don't think that's a secret. And so the question really is, when is the tipping point coming, and when are the first narrow products launched, available, and we can verticalize the approach of some of these solutions, where then you can grow, right, from a beachhead and so I think that's the question that everybody's waiting for, and I don't have a good answer. Otherwise, we would be number one already if we had the answer from a market capitalization point of view. But I think, is it the iPhone moment? Is it an App Store moment? Is it, is it some layer 2 solution with anonymity that is getting people over the hump when they, I don't know, is it coupons? Is it, is it reward? I don't know. I have no idea what the first use case is.
I don't think anybody is. I don't think anybody does. But what's interesting to me is, when we started the conversation, or before we got on the actual recording, one of the things you talked about, and you've touched on briefly throughout the interview, is the fact that what we have in what we refer to as DeFi today is not kind of there yet, right? And we don't really have that. It's primarily based on lending protocols, and that it's not actually what the finance world is expecting. And I'm wondering if for you all, kind of already seeing that, if that kind of helps you. And I realize, look, it's an open project and people are going to come build whatever they want to build that they think fits the model. But is there a place where you all could actually start steering towards kind of some of those philosophical things that you think are missing in the world of DeFi, with understanding that that's a massive, I mean, you're talking about massively larger sums of finance and investing in money than what exists today in all of the protocols on DeFi.
Well, okay, so yeah, when we spoke, right, so really the difference between DeFi and TradFi, and not the commonality between DeFi and TradFi, is finance. It's finance, right? And at the moment, DeFi is mostly over-collateralized lending, and that is a niche application in the real world, right? There's not a lot of over-collateralized lending. Some could argue, some listeners will say, well, mortgages are over-collateralized. That's true, but that's kind of like, it still relies on your cash flow, right? That yes, it is over, but still you're committing, anyone who's taking a mortgage out commits to a lot of cash flows as well, right? So not necessarily as simple as that. And there's a margin call, right? So I mean, this is in a mortgage environment. So in a normal mortgage environment. So so we think, look, I mean, so on the finance side, as I said before, we're building on this algorithmic financial standard, this open source algorithmic financial standard. And we believe that is also an answer or an interesting option for DeFi applications. And hopefully we can prove that soon. I mean, with traditional players, we are now working on tokenization of options. And so we're gonna have a working prototype for tokenization of options. There's no reason why this could not also be in a DeFi environment. It doesn't have to be a centralized, right? This can also live in DeFi environments. So there, I think we have a very deep understanding of what we think is going to work and is required. So, but Cardano does as well. They agree with us that the standard is the way forward, and they've included the standard in their Marlowe, setup, and this active standard, and and then the question is, can we provide more useful and better developer tools and primitives so that people start, building on Casper in DeFi as well. So that's up to us, right? We have to show the way a little bit. Right?
Yeah. So. How I noticed you have a pretty decently sized team there, and it looks like a lot of experience and skills on the team. In terms of kind of the community that are working on projects, is that growing for you? Do you feel good about where you are and how that's happening now?
Yeah, so I think we have a decent sized community. We have a pretty good interaction for devs on Discord. So we have I think we have still over 30,000 or 35,000 participants on Discord. So it's quite We have people 24 hours manned, to answer technical questions. So this is all there. Then we have a fairly large Telegram, following, and we have a fairly large Twitter following. But of course, we would like more devs to contribute to the core. That's our goal, and that's we have taken some steps, including the dev portal. Then we have the Casper Association itself has a grant program, which gives small grants. Okay, so people need to know we have small grants, but we still give grants as opposed to other chains which no longer give any grants.
That's right.
So we still give grants for specific building specifically on Casper, and ideally smaller applications, because we also don't want to have the risk of very complex projects over a longer period of time, which is very difficult to manage, both for the teams themselves as well as for us.
Sure.
So, and then what we will have is we haven't rolled that out yet. Next program is some dev rewards where we will pose specific problems to the community, very simple ones that then can be solved and contributed to the core or to the existing environments. And we are also making visible what is being built. So there's a Casper ecosystem page where you can see what is being built. Very neutral. I mean, we don't take any sides. If you meet some minimum requirements, you can basically just promote your project.
Nice, very nice. All right, so two more questions. First is there anything else we haven't covered about Casper that you think we should make sure we hit upon? I guess people need to go to casper.network if they want to check it out. Is that the first place to start?
That's correct. Yes.
Great. And I'll post that in the show notes. But is there anything else you think that I've missed asking you about so far?
Casper related? No, I think we've explored quite a bit. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So my last question I have two questions I ask. I'm going to ask them for you. This will be interesting. The first is, are there, in the existing crypto space, in the existing DeFi, whatever blockchain DLT space, who is someone that you think has been incredibly important, or that you have just unbelievable respect for? And it could be the standard ones that some people say, but it'll also be, I think, kind of your genesis story into crypto is very interesting to me. Anyway, folks that you have a lot of respect for, that you think are incredibly important, past or future, for where we're headed.
Well, I really think that probably one of the most important contributions is the definition of what a smart contract is by Nick Szabo. Right.
Gosh, nice.
It's really, I think if people here don't know what it is, I will say it now because it's really critical to understand, right? What is a smart contract, right? The smart contract has 4 characteristics, right? It allows for observability, for verifiability, and these first 2 conditions enable enforceability of what was basically coded. And then the last condition he had was privity, right? Which is kind of privacy, right? So you have an option of not showing or hiding what or I don't know, or wailing what was done in this transactions. And people forget this is really critical, right? It's not and Vitalik would say, by the way, and I've written about this too, right? Vitalik, specifically in the context of finance, Vitalik would say that the traditional definition of what a smart contract is not it's neither a contract nor is it smart. I think he called it script, right? He said, right. I would have better have.
Wish I had changed the name.
I would have called it script or something, right? So this is why I think it's important when we talk about smart contracts to really think about Nick Szabo's definition of what makes a smart contract really a smart contract, which is these 4.
That's great. And that's a great contribution to recognize. It's funny because, look, I think there are plenty of people in the space that know about Nick, but I think there's an entire, the word's not generation, an entire set of users that don't know how much work was put in by people, back then to set the standards that we actually are building upon today. And that's really interesting. I love that. That's great. All right. So usually the next question I ask to founders, but I think it'll be interesting for you because you have such a varied background. Having been someone who's worked in startups, who has built in this space, who's been an investor, the question I often ask is there a lesson or lessons that if you could pass on to kind of every founder in the crypto space, or say every founder joining Casper, is there something you would make sure that everybody knew?
It's a tough question. It's much more difficult than the one before. you're gonna have to cut the length of
the
thing here, I
pause. That's
believe.
fine.
Yeah,
I mean, are there things that you learned and mistakes you made that that you'd hate to see somebody else repeat, or assumptions you made? Or
so I really like roadmaps, right? I keep asking for roadmaps. Because it's about not just your idea or your code base at the moment, but it's about how will it evolve and what are you doing for it to evolve. And I think that is an undermanaged and an undervalued capability to produce a consistent and a coherent roadmap. Of course, it's software development, so it's difficult to adhere to the very details that you're laying out, right? But you should have a fairly comprehensive vision of what ultimately this should look like. I would beware of asking for a customer. I understand that that's of course really important, but if you just ask a customer, you're not necessarily getting the innovation or that a distributed ledger technology and the shared ledger can bring, right? Because they cannot conceive of what it should look like. So a mix between this visionary approach and the solid roadmap that can be implemented, and then hopefully finding some customers that actually invest with you along the way. That would be, the ideal situation.
I love that. And actually, there's so much truth to the roadmap thing. It's funny, even founders I talk to now in crypto, I'll say, well, have you thought about writing a business plan? And they'll say, well, this is crypto, we don't have to write a business plan. And I'll say, well, maybe you want some revenue, maybe, whatever. But the reason I tell them to write a business plan is not to fit the old investor model or anything else. It's because the process of doing that, just like the process of building a roadmap, forces you to think about where you're going and what you might run into getting there, right? And so from that perspective, I think that's an awesome piece of advice, because having a direction makes total sense. Not to mention it's great because you want your community to know, you want people to know where you're planning to go, right? So that's great.
And the other aspect is it's really mundane. I have a hard time writing good slides. So because that's the key, that's a key skill, right? If you really want to bring your ideas across, you should be able to write good slides, draw good slides.
Yeah, I'm actually I've taught a lot of folks presentations and skills, and
that's true. I saw that. Yeah, it's cool.
And when I start doing it myself, which I'm in the middle of revamping a deck right now, it's really painful to realize that you're really bad at it when you're doing it yourself, as opposed to teaching other people how to do it. So yeah, absolutely. Great piece of advice, Ralf. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It makes me want to take a deeper dive into Casper and what you all are doing. I love the ethics and ethos and the approach that you're taking to it. And I hope things go really well for you as you guys move forward from here.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Ralf. Appreciate it.